A major report on mitigating greenhouse gas emissions was released in April by the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, otherwise known as the IPCC. The report shows that greenhouse gas emissions have risen to unprecedented levels, but it also shows that with ambitious mitigation efforts it is possible to stay within the 2 degrees threshold. Irish Environment sat down with Annika Ahtonen, who is a policy expert in climate at the European Policy Centre, to discuss the report. So Europe claims to be a very ambitious climate leader, particularly through its framework for climate change and energy policies. But is what Europe's doing lining up with what the IPCC recommends in its report?
And is the EU doing enough? I would say that what we have seen at EU level, there is progress, and we have taken the climate challenge seriously. What we have seen with the 2020 framework is that we are on track in achieving these targets, which is obviously showing that there is improvement. However, at the moment, what we see that the climate among the EU member states, it is changing. We see that the climate and energy agenda, it is being kind of pressured at the moment by the whole competitiveness aspect. And so that there is the big question around affordability and how can we ensure the competitiveness of European industry while at the same time trying to meet the climate targets. And so this is something that we can really see now when we're heading to the discussion around the 2030 climate and energy framework as well, and thinking that what will be the next steps that the EU should do. So this is something that's we can see that the environment and the climate is very different what we had when we were discussing the 2020 targets. So one could say that the EU is not really achieving and is not really able to be the climate leader it hopes to be. And I would say that the main reason for that is that it has really failed to show and to demonstrate both its own member states as well as for the world in general that actually it makes sense to act now and to show both the economic, the social, the environmental benefits of acting now. And just taking the moral leadership, trying to show that yes, this is morally important and it's important to act on climate, it's not enough. What you need is a story, what you need is a narrative that attracts EU member states, citizens, industry within Europe, but then also the actors outside, the big actors outside, to show them that it actually makes sense to act now.
And the IPCC report recommends very, very big behavioural and technological changes in order for us to stay within the threshold of 2 degrees. Do you think that European leaders, particularly when we're looking at the big emitters, that they're ready and willing to actually implement these changes?
I think what needs to happen, we clearly see that there is an important role for technology, and there's more and more discussion around how behavior, just by true behavior, we can change and actually help to reduce our emissions and have a positive impact on climate that way. But what I think is missing is the link on understanding the benefits of acting now and benefits of investing into these technologies and the benefits of changing our behaviors. And something that I often like to make a reference to is, for example, air pollution. Is that what we're totally failing to do in the EU is to understand that in fact trying to reduce our emissions, for example transport emissions, will actually mean that our air pollution will reduce, and this will have enormous positive impacts for health, and it will reduce our health-related costs. And these are the kind of arguments that we need to have much more in the play when we are talking about how to fight the climate change.
And when we're looking at the EU is very good at promoting its targets. So it talks about the target for 2030 being 40% below 1990 levels. And then the IPCC has come out with a global target for 80% below 2010 levels, I believe, and that's by 2050. So it's hard to know if these line up. What would be your feeling on that?
I think in general one of my reactions always with these targets is a bit of a question mark. Is that it's very difficult to know how these targets have been really developed.
Yeah.
It's the same as just kind of what I always like to remind people is that, for example, the 2020 target for 2020, it does sound that it just sounded very good.
Yeah.
So it's the whole question. First of all, the question is that what are these targets based on, and to what extent they're based on science. First comment. Secondly, obviously the 40% target, that's now for EU member states, while again the IPCC target is obviously that's for a global level.
Yeah.
But on just looking at the EU target itself, I think that's it's good to keep in mind that setting these kind of targets can be misguiding as well. And the EU target of reducing global emissions at the moment, which is 20% by 2020, and the proposed 40% target by the European Commission to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030. These are basically what these are doing. These are trying to measure how much emissions are being produced in the EU and reducing that. They're not taking into account of how much emissions we are actually using within the EU. They're not taking into account should our European industry move manufacturing outside the EU, how much emissions will increase because of that outside the EU. It's not considering that. And it's not considering that how much emissions have been how much emissions have been produced because of producing products outside the EU. And so what we would in the end need is to understand that how can the EU ensure that whatever target it sets itself here, it is helping to reduce global emissions. Just trying to reduce European emissions in the end will not, looking at the EU share of global emissions, which is 11% at the moment, only about to decrease, what the EU will do will be peanuts if it doesn't actually help to reduce global emissions.
And actually, on that note, is there an agreed way of a globally agreed way of calculating emissions? Because if the EU is using this, the IPCC is using, and other countries presumably are using their own calculations, it's very hard to compare and contrast and see what's actually being done.
At the moment, really, the measuring of emissions, it is very much based on how much emissions are being produced within a region. But that's one of the kind of biggest critiques I have for this, is that we're not actually measuring that how much are European consumers producing as well as consuming. And so that it would give us much better understanding of what really our global carbon footprint is.
So when we're looking at the framework for climate change and energy policies, the EU leaders recently postponed a decision on it. What would you say are going to be the major stumbling blocks when they get down to properly discussing this?
I think we see that among the EU member states there is great difference, obviously related to the kind of historical backgrounds, but then also the kind of energy mixes that different member states are using. So this is all coming into play when we're discussing the climate and energy framework. And that's, I think that the discussion, it's only going to continue because we can see that among member states there are some who are putting great emphasis on ensuring their own energy security, ensuring that energy remains affordable, which for countries such as, for example, Poland, means that they want to continue to rely on coal powered energy, and which obviously will only continue to increase emissions. The same, I have to say, is that something that we tend to forget. We look at Germany as an example of a country which, with the whole discussion around Energiewende and the kind of transition into cleaner energies, but in fact what is happening in Germany at the moment is that they're investing much more in coal-powered power plants, and what they have seen is a paradigm shift where they are investing in renewables and coal at the same time, which in the end it's not actually favouring climate any better than the current framework would do.
And so do you see, I think they've set late this year as their deadline for agreeing the framework. Do you see it being very much diluted by the time that it actually comes through?
I have to say, I think that there were a lot of hopes were that in March a member state would be able to agree on something.
Yeah.
I actually was quite pleased to see that what was said was that already in June there will be stock taking on what the progress has been so far, and by October member states will have to come up with their proposal for what the framework would look like.
Yeah.
And I actually think that this already is quite ambitious, trying to have something on the paper by October.
Okay.
So I actually thought that this was, I know that many have called for a more ambitious and faster process, but I think it does take time. So for me, I actually think that the timetable, I think if we utilize it well, and if we really use this time to now think that what would a good climate and energy framework look like, and at the same time I would really like to make reference to also the kind of new momentum we have ongoing on the discussion around energy and energy policy. Is really looking at the kind of what happened after Russian actions in Ukraine. What we have seen is a much stronger emphasis on EU's energy policy among EU member states. And this is really, we have not seen this kind of a momentum and a push for EU's energy policy in a long time. And this is a great time. We're now discussing both the energy policy as well as the climate policy at the same time. And what is very important is that we make sure that these are interlinked and comprehensive. So when we're talking about increasing EU's energy security, I think there must be very strong reference to energy efficiency, much stronger push for that than we've seen so far. And another thing is creating a smart grid for renewables. It does not make sense to invest in renewables until we actually have a smart grid that integrate them into the system. And so these measures would help both the climate as well as EU's energy security, and it's very important that these policies and these decisions are being taken at the same time.
So it's a crucial time at the moment.
Exactly.
If we just return a little bit to the IPCC report, when it was published, there was a policymaker's summary also published at the same time, and governments had influence over what was published there, and some scientists came out in media reports saying that they were disappointed that had been a lot of editing and censoring. Do you think that this kind of activity by governments actually undermines the work of the IPCC?
That's it's very unfortunate reality where we're living in, where we're trying to bring science, policy making, decision making together. And obviously we have this strong call that policy making should be based on science. At the same time, the scientists obviously, they just want to concentrate on their work, and they would want to show that their work is being taken seriously. So this kind of undermining of the results, it is very unfortunate. At the same time, it is very reflective of the reality where in the end, on the political level, decisions are being made on what is being communicated to, whether it's to the citizens, whether it's to the world in large. And I think it's just a good reminder of how the world works. Obviously, I think that even though the critique is there that it was watered down and some of the essential graphs were taken out and kind of the message did not come out as clear as it should have, I think still when you read through the report, the summary report of the IPCC report, I think the message is very clear. I think that it does show action is needed. The situation is much worse than what it was and what was expected some time ago. And so I think that there's no question about it that action must be taken now. And it is now, it's just about members, about different countries coming together and deciding on what the measures will be. And hopefully a lot of the kind of the scientific basis and the reports of the IPCC provide a strong basis for action.
And there's a lot of focus already on COP21 in Paris. So do you think that the messages in this report will strongly influence the activities in Paris? Of course, the IPCC would hope so, I'm sure.
And I would as well. And I think the message messages will be taken forward. And I think that it's very important that in that UN process the IPCC reports and the results are being taken into account in the discussions. So I think that is the case. How much it will influence the different countries, that's obviously remains to be seen. And that's something that we have seen in the past, is that despite all the evidence we have, it's still very, very difficult to get different countries to act. And here I would like to go back to that the best way to get members, both EU member states, but also the global actors to really take action now, is to put together kind of a list, show what are the economic, social, environmental benefits of acting now, because that is the best way of showing whether it's China, whether it's US, whether it's Europe, whether it's Russia, whether it's Saudi Arabia, showing that it actually just makes sense for them and for their industry and for their citizens. It does make sense that action is being taken now.
And just finally, in the report, one of the headline messages was that actually implementing all of these changes does not have the intense effect on economic growth that some people would have us believe. I think they claim that growth would only be affected by 0.06%. Do you think that message will help what you were just talking about, that economic growth is not going to suffer massively?
Yes, I think that would work, but I would even want to turn it more positively. I would want to show that how will this actually benefit, and just taking, for example, the health benefits of reducing air pollution. The health benefits will be enormous, and there are already calculations showing this. The same for environmental benefits, and there are also estimates that show that actually this will have very positive economic effects. So trying to find that what really are the core benefits of acting now, and this obviously it requires a lot of work, because we have not used to putting monetary value, for example, on the environmental benefits, and this is something that we need to do if we are really to bring out the real benefits.
Annika, thank you very much for speaking with us at IrishEnvironment.com.
Thank you.